Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Helen Wiley. I'm the Disaster Preparedness Program Director at SBP. Today's household webinar is on getting your finances prepared for disasters. A few housekeeping notes as we get going. Today's webinar is being recorded, and so if you need to jump early, please feel free to do so, and we'll be sending out the recording to all folks that registered. Additionally, we ask that you please put your questions in the Q&A box. We will answer any questions folks have at the end of the call today. Additionally, we'll share our email address in the chat, and you can always email us with any additional questions you have. So with that, we'll get started. SBP, if you're not familiar with us, we're a national disaster recovery and resilience organization that works across the disaster cycle to shrink the time between disasters and recovery. We do this through 5 main programs, which includes rebuilding homes after disaster events to higher resiliency standards, sharing out lessons learned with other organizations and utilizing our knowledge base in the rebuilding for other orgs, preparedness, which is this program, which I'll share more about shortly, and then advising and advocating, working with government leaders to improve the programs and policies that can serve folks pre and post disaster. In our preparedness program at SBP, we really work to empower not only households, but all the community stakeholders with essential tools to proactively prepare for future events. We really believe that building the knowledge and capacity of both individuals and community leaders is really critical as we look to build a larger culture of preparedness. You can learn more about our program by going to our website and under what we do, visiting our preparedness page. This household webinar today is really aimed at you all who are listening in. I want to note that we have an abundance of different resources that are available on our site, including checklists and written guides, short video recordings, webinar recordings, and you can go to our Prepare Natural Disaster webpage to find all of our different resources. Some of those we'll note during today's training, but there's many other topics and materials that are available to assist you. So today we're talking about getting financially prepared for future events. And so we're going to talk through a few different central categories that we believe are really critical as you think forward to, again, how do I get prepared next time? Financially, what do I need to be thinking about? And so we'll talk briefly about knowing your risks, but then, what does it mean to protect important documents? And then what are your different options that you can be planning for right now as you figure out which financial tools will aid you best and fit your financial situation, depending on the disaster event and scale. We also just want to note that we, rely on feedback from training participants to know what information is most helpful as we continue to build our curriculum and improve our training. So we ask that you consider taking our 1-minute survey following today's session. So really briefly, we're talking about financial preparedness today, but it is so important that everything begins with knowing your risks. And so our top tip that we really share across all of our different trainings is that you need to better understand what your disaster risks are as you're making different decisions. And so we encourage folks to go to riskfactor.com, which is a website that was created by the First Street Foundation, which is a national nonprofit. And it gives you, based on your address or zip code, whichever you put in, a score between 1 and 10 of what your risk is for whether it's wildfire or flood or hurricane, wind, heat. You'll learn more about, risks for your particular property or your zip code. And so we encourage you to go there to learn more. So, building off of better understanding what your risks are for different types of disaster events, when we think about getting financially prepared, one of the top things that you can do that isn't going to cost you any money is securing your important documents. And so there's four different categories of documents that we think about, and those are your personal documents, household, legal, and medical. I'm going to go through, some specifics of what counts under the first three buckets. And while I'm not going to go through medical in depth today, I want to note just how important it is for, particularly if you have elderly family members or those with a lot of different medical, and health challenges, that it's important to, again, know what their prescriptions are, etc., in a disaster event. So the first category is personal ID documents. When you experience a disaster, if you are your home's destroyed, a lot of things are lost, it's really helpful to have documentation on who you are that you have in a secure place, so that you've got copies of things that you can supply to verify who you are when you're going to a bank, or when you're applying for disaster aid or an insurance payout. And so making copies of things like your driver's license or other ID cards, your social security card number, knowing what that is. If you have pets, again, this gets less into financial, but having your pets, microchip number can be really helpful if you were to be separated from them. And so we go into household documents. And so, this again, just future planning of, okay, there's different costs if your home gets damaged after an event. Having information already put together on the service and utility providers in your area, repair and contractor folks that could come and help you. Really important to have gathered that type of documentation pre-disaster, because you're more likely to get them out quickly after if you've already identified who you'd be trying to reach out to. And then most importantly, when we're thinking about, financial, is there's different financial and legal documents that we really want to be gathering during, blue skies. So right now, when there's no disaster event going on, to really then speed again your recovery when you're applying for aid or an insurance payout after an event. And so if you're a homeowner, that means having your title documents, copies of those. If you're a renter, that means having a copy of your lease agreement. Having information that's not online about your bank account, where are your different accounts stored, where are your numbers, what are your home insurance policy, what is the coverage amount, and having copies of all these things bundled together is really helpful. And before I move on, what I just want to say is, okay, so you've gathered all these documents. What do you do with them? And what we really encourage, again, is to, whether it is, again, depending on what you're most comfortable with, store all these copies of these documents in a secure cloud-based server. So that could be, it could be Dropbox if you pay for that. It could be a Google Drive account, but somewhere that is a place you feel comfortable with, that you could have copies of these documents secured. Non-online, great options are putting copies of these on a flash drive and having them be part of, a emergency evacuation kit that you have, or giving copies to trusted family members or friends that you keep off-site. So again, the goal being that you have this information already gathered pre-disaster. And so now we're going to go a bit more into recovery planning. And one thing that SBP, we really see is all the unanticipated costs that folks don't know to prepare for when a disaster occurs. And so in this slide, I've just given some different examples of, you as a household or homeowner, what are some of the different costs that you might need to deal with in your immediate response if you sustain a major hurricane or wildfire event. If you own a home, what are the property costs you might have? And so one thing we really see, for instance, is even, just the extra money people need to have budgeted for refueling their generator. That can be very burdensome. And so thinking through based on your financial situation, your location, and what are the risks in your area, again, going back to doing that evaluation on riskfactor.com. What are the different things that you're most concerned about as different costs? Even again, decreased employment, if you can't get to work and therefore can't get a paycheck, how much money are you trying to budget for of emergency expenses if you experience a disaster event? And so we'll get a little bit more into, ideally what you'd want to budget, but it's really important in blue skies, again, like right now, to think through, okay, there's 4 different major sources of funding that you could rely on potentially if a disaster occurred. And which of these 4 different funding sources would best be suited to your needs, and which of them would you be able to access? And so we're going to talk a little bit through each of these 4 buckets here. What's really important, again, when we're financially planning for events is reflecting back on, which of these financial sources can I rely on for my recovery if a disaster occurs? And where can I rebudget to set aside money for unexpected expenses? So, if you've ever done any larger financial planning, a real goal that households should have is 3 to 6 months of their overall expenses that you've pre-planned for in savings in case of something unexpected, like losing a job or a natural disaster. And so thinking through, with this framing and those different types of potential costs I shared on the previous slide, how can you rebudget? What can you set aside for these unexpected things? And so savings base level, you want to think about sheltering costs. If you have to evacuate because of a major hurricane, what savings would you need to have to shelter away from home for 2 to 3 days? So that would be, a minimum level of, let's say $300 minimum you'd need for sheltering costs in the immediate. As I shared in that previous slide, if your home were to be destroyed, you might need to shelter away for 3 to 6 months or more while your home's being repaired. And so an ideal way you'd be trying to save a lot more money, but we know that's challenging. Deductibles. If you have insurance, most insurance policies, you're going to be required to pay a certain amount out of pocket before you can access the full claim amount. And so important for you to be checking, right now, like what are your deductibles for a homeowner's or flood insurance policy you have, and make sure you're saving up for that amount so that you don't have a delay in how long you need to save before you're able to access the payout. And then again, as I shared, lots of unexpected costs that you need to be planning for. Loans, so thinking through in advance, what are there credit and loan options that you'd be able to pursue if a disaster occurred? And so really we encourage folks with their financial planning to meet with a counselor at a bank to discuss your current household budget and the best ways for you to plan for unexpected expenses. Um, After a major disaster declaration, which for instance, most hurricanes would have them for different impacted areas, the Small Business Administration at the federal level offers disaster assistance in the form of low interest loans. And while this is housed under the Small Business Administration, these loans are actually available for homeowners and renters in affected regions. And so it's important to know that loan options are one thing that you could pursue when there's a major disaster event. Another thing that folks, often look towards is disaster aid. And so one thing you can do during blue skies is understand if you actually would qualify for federal disaster assistance in the event of a major disaster declaration. It could be challenging for folks that if you've, recently moved into a new home or area, the way it works typically is that folks who maybe lived in your home previously, if they went through a disaster event and utilized disaster assistance, The disaster assistance is actually aligned with like that property rather than, whether an individual has tapped into utilizing federal assistance before. And so actually really important for you to find out if there's any, requirements that are placed on your home that would preclude you from being able to access federal aid in future. So for instance, there's a requirement that those who've, homes where they've received federal disaster aid in the past, those properties cannot receive assistance again in future for a similar event. So, if it was a tornado in the past and there would be another tornado that impacted that home, you would not be able to utilize assistance unless you had insurance coverage for that same type of event. And so really important to find out from FEMA if there are any insurance requirements on your property. The other thing I want to note is while federal assistance is, available when there's federal disaster declarations, not every disaster is going to be big enough to trigger one of these declarations. And so that means that there may not be, federal monies that are available to help you for your recovery, even if there's huge impact in your area. And so that's again why it's important to think through, what are your savings? Are there like localized credit or loan options? And again, what is your insurance coverage that you have? If you do experience a disaster event in future, what we do want to encourage is if you apply for federal aid, it is really important to maximize your award amount from the federal government because, as I mentioned, it's hard to apply multiple times across different disasters. And so we, for instance, at SBP have a FEMA appeals program where we help survivors maximize their award amount. Regardless if you work through us, it's really important to try to maximize your FEMA award amount because again, this is, the one time that you're likely to get assistance through the federal government in your recovery. So, finally, we talked about savings and loans and aid and how they work as a financial tool. But our ultimate recommendation is it's really important when you're financially planning for disasters to try to get the necessary insurance coverage. What research shows us is that those with insurance recover better and faster than those without. When you look at the different award amounts, historically, those that have utilized disaster assistance grants through FEMA only get about $5,000 versus those that actually get payouts through the federal flood insurance program, which is also through FEMA, get about $69,000. And so that's a major difference in, planning for your recovery and the resources you'd have available. There's a lot of confusion often in what is covered in different insurance policies. And so really important is, again, right now to be checking out, if you're a homeowner and have homeowner's insurance as part of your mortgage, what are the different perils that are covered under your policy? Same would be true for renters. If you're a renter, you can have a contents only policy for the place that you're living. And so really important to know, what is covered under that policy in the event of a disaster. Most importantly, and this is often a misconception, flood is not included under homeowners or renters policies. And so, again, important to learn what your risks are for different events because flooding is the most common disaster type in the US. And it is often where folks don't have the necessary insurance protection. And so other things to note, of course, are, earthquakes as well. There was recently just an earthquake here in the northeast of the US where I live, but earthquake policies are also excluded from homeowners policies typically, and you would need to get a separate coverage. Something else we encourage folks to look at as a quick tip is there's this great tool that was developed by Rutgers University recently. And so if you're shopping around for homeowners insurance policies, this is a tool that researchers created to help you, compare different providers of homeowners insurance for how good the coverage is, what it pays, and, which of these different perils it's covering. So encourage you guys to check that out. And then finally, here on this part of talking about flood insurance, again, just want to reestablish that, flood losses are not covered by your typical policy. And really anyone with any flood risk, if you're financially planning for a disaster, you should have flood insurance coverage to protect you. Importantly, it's actually a lot cheaper to get a flood insurance policy if you're not in an area that flood insurance coverage is mandated. And so, you might have heard how expensive it is, but if you have any risk but don't live in an area that's mandated, look into what the costs would be, because it may not be as much as you think. Same is true for renters. Renters would have a contents only policy versus a policy that covers their structure, and that's a lot cheaper to get a policy that just covers your contents. We have great resources on our website of different types of questions you'd want to ask your insurance agent about. And so, please consider utilizing this to understand, what are the perils covered in your policy, and, what are the different values listed for your home and contents that you need to update. Did you recently get a large new appliance and you need to save in your kind of home inventory? What are the receipts, etc., for recent large expenditures, and so therefore values in your home that you'd want your insurance policy to cover if you had damage. And it's all really connected when we think about financial preparedness. And so, while we bucketed out savings from insurance, as I mentioned earlier, saving for your deductibles is really important in order to be prepared to utilize your insurance and recover more quickly. Setting aside your emergency cash for those things that come up that are unexpected. And then, tailored to, protecting your important documents. One of our top tips is to make a home inventory. So take pictures or video your home, literally walk around your home and video all the contents of what's in your home. So that would take only 5 or 10 minutes, and then save that video to the cloud or on the flash drive where you've, put different copies of important documents. And this inventory will act as really important evidence of the pre-disaster conditions of your home and structure. We're wrapping up here now. I just want to state that, because this is often something we see as confusion for those with a mortgage, is those who have a mortgage, your insurance contract is actually between the insurance company and the owner of the property, which at that time is the mortgage holder, or the mortgage company. And so just know that there can be delays in how quickly you'll receive your payout from an insurance company because when disaster damage is over a certain threshold, most insurance companies are legally required to put the mortgage company's name on the settlement check to help avoid actually a major loss if, for instance, a contractor were to be engaged in fraudulent activities and make off with a substantial part of your claim check. They promise to do, X amount of work, and then they go off and don't deliver the services. The insurance companies and mortgage companies, really care about you being able to get your home back to its pre-disaster condition. And so they'll kind of give you payouts in 2 to 3, lump sums to avoid having a contractor make off with all the money at once. So just know that that can be a delay when there's a major disaster event. Again, we encourage folks to have insurance. So if you have disaster insurance through the federal government in the form of flood insurance, you can always bring your concerns for the National Flood Insurance Program to the government. But there's also a division of consumer services within your state's Department of Financial Services, or insurance. It depends state by state of which it's called. And so when you have challenges with your homeowner's insurance or your flood insurance, absolutely, report those to your division of consumer services, because they want to hear from you as policyholders on challenges you're having, because they can improve regulations in your state to make sure that you can get resources that you need. Another top tip of ours is to go to unitedpolicyholders.com because they have fantastic resources as a nonprofit to help consumers navigate insurance challenges across all 50 states. And so with that, this was a short webinar today. We hope it gave you some information as you start financially planning for a future disaster event. But you can access more of our resources on our website at sbpusa.org/prepare natural disaster. And so with that, I just want to encourage you again to take our 1-minute survey to share with us, what you learned and what else would be helpful to have in short webinars like today. But we will now open up to any questions you might have.
I'm seeing no questions in the Q&A box. So if anyone does have anything, please feel free to go ahead and throw that in there, and we'll spend some time with Q&A now. But we do also have our contact information on the slide and then also dropped in the chat. So if you have any questions that you think of later in the day, please feel free to give us an email and we'll be happy to answer.
Thanks, Tessa. And with that, we'll conclude today's webinar, but we want to say again, financial preparedness, very important part as you start planning for a future disaster event. And so we hope today's webinar was helpful for you, but please feel free to reach out to us at prepare@sbpusa.org if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you so much.